it's such a privilege, and it is such an honor to introduce to the summit Dr. Patti Fletcher. This lady is exceptional. She is a best-selling author. She is a global speaker. She is an award-winning business strategist. But I think my favorite part of her title is disruptor. Dr. Patti, welcome. Welcome to the table.
Thank you. It's so good to be here. I love being at your table.
Welcome anytime. I just did want to jump straight into your book, and Disruptors is the title of it. I mean, it can't get any better than that. Can we backtrack and go, just start from the beginning? What inspired you to write it?
Yeah, so, it was born several years before it came to the shelves. And in fact, it was born a few generations before I was. So in my 30s, I supported my family, ever since being a grown-up. And I worked a lot, and I grew up in tech, enterprise technology, and it's been an amazing career. Very, very, very fortunate. But if you asked my children, they were young and several did, what does your mom do for a living? They would say she flies around on an airplane, yells at her computer, and laughs on the phone. That was pretty much, right? Like that, not much has changed. So not much has changed. So when I was in my 30s, a few things happened that made me, September 11th being one of them, and the realization of no matter how hard I worked, everything could be taken away from me, and it, having nothing to do with me. And it really reminded me of my maternal grandmother. Both of my mother's parents were survivors of the Armenian genocide, and my grandmother was orphaned in the genocide, and her entire life was defined by having no voice in it. From who she got married to, which was my grandfather, an arranged marriage, not a good guy, and just never really could break out, and just a life of oppression. And so my mom, right, she was, trying to make life a little bit better, and she went to secretary school, and she worked before working moms were a thing, at least here in the States. And so she would bring me to my Nana, and my Nana would watch me. And we had such a good time, just Mother Teresa kind of woman, just always felt so special. And she would always tell me, all the things that I could do if I just wanted to do them, just really believed in me. Oh. But I didn't know a lot about her, and we just never talked about those things. And so, and she was just one of those people, she was like Mr. Rogers. She was never, which, someone here in the States, a kids program, you were never talked about herself. So in my 30s, like I said, for some reason, it just kind of jogged this whole cellular thing about genocide. And I do think that kind of travels in our bodies from generation to generation. And I couldn't find out more about her. It just made me more curious about this woman who truly was inspiring me to live the life that I wanted to live simply because I could, because she didn't have those choices. And so I ended up going back for my PhD because my MBA training and my business training really taught me to give an answer before I understood a problem, right? We forgot in the software world what the word solution actually means. It's become synonymous with product versus there is a problem, this will solve it. Yeah. So I ended up going back for my doctorate to learn how to research like a scholar. At the end of the war, as it was called, the Turkish government, the Ottoman Empire, changed the language, and they changed their language so folks couldn't look back and see things that really happened. And so I ended up, I was about a year and a half, 2 years into my dissertation proposal, and it was a totally different topic. My company, SAP at the time, was paying for part of my tuition. And so I was focused in on more something conducive to that world. And it was a great topic. But I was about that far along, and I was forced to take a feminist leadership theory class. I was raised to believe that feminism was an or equation, not an and equation.
Yeah, okay.
Right. And so I sit in this class, and I got to tell you, within 2 minutes, I was like, oh my goodness, I might be the dumbest person in the world. Because back then, unconscious bias wasn't a thing. You didn't talk about being a woman in a, whatever, in business. I didn't even realize I was always the only woman in the room. I was so conditioned for other things. And it just had this curiosity that fueled me. And I ended up scrapping, a few years worth of work and changing my dissertation to be a phenomenological study of women who held board of director positions in publicly held life sciences and tech businesses. At the time, those were the most technology intensive industries. And I wanted to find out, like all about them and the glass ceiling and all this. And the research at the time for gender in those industries was at the VP level. So it was really cool. And so I'm finding out, I get to interview the 15 women who held the positions. And that one of the great things was working for a name brand company, because those folks are connected. And so I got to meet, talk to them, and everybody wants to talk to them, right? So that was very cool. So I'm learning about them, and I'm learning they're just like me. They came from humble beginnings. They didn't have connected families. And the thing that really stuck out to me, and there are multiple things, and they're in the book in terms of themes, as well as some of the women I interviewed are in there, is that these women were not ego driven. They had healthy egos, right? They were where so few humans have gone, right? Those tech boardrooms, public companies, let alone women. But really, everything they did was for a purpose bigger than themselves. And the reason they took the board seat is because it was the best way not only to create strategy for a company, but to set a different policy and set of norms for an industry.
Beautiful.
And so it was so interesting. And I'm learning about them at the same time as I'm learning about my grandmother, her mother, her sisters. And here I am going, okay, I was born in 1969 in America, color of my skin. We are a pretty racist country, as we know, with a mouth I can't keep shut and ears I can't stop listening to. And here I am learning about these women who say it's not about power in the position. It is about creating a platform and inviting people onto that platform to create real change. And so that's what motivated me, is learning about these amazing women, and also realizing the shoulders I stand on from these amazing Armenian women who really never had a say. My great grandmother gave up her own life. She literally gave up her own life to save her children. I don't ever want that to happen again. I never want a woman to not have agency. The challenge is I've always been quirky. I've always I cannot look at a status quo that's inefficient, ineffective, and inequitable and not change it. I've always been like that. It's been one of my favorite things about myself, but most of my life, one of the worst things about me, because I just can't be happy, right? What I always thought, and what you read about in the book, is that we all thought we were the only ones who saw the things that we saw. We always felt alone. And so I knew these stories had to come out, because it created a platform that was, by the time the book came out, Lean In had been, the book Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, which was quite big in the States, but obviously globally as well. I was excited when that book came out, because it brought the topic of women in the workplace to the mainstream. The problem is that I didn't like the book. Because if I leaned in anymore, if you leaned in anymore, our faces would hit the ground.
That was one of my favorite quotes of yours.
Right? It's true. But it's true, right? And so it's like, I don't need to come from a tier 1 school. I don't need to have a certain look. I don't need to come from a connected family. And I certainly don't need to think that the only place for success is in a boardroom or as a CEO. I believe, and I connect so much with these women because they are purpose driven. They see this, the inefficiency, the ineffectiveness, the inequity, which is a definition of a disruptor, right? And wanting to create a new status quo that are those 3 things: the efficiency, the equity, the effectiveness. And so that's really why that book is, so that we could see ourselves. That's the first. The next thing is, at the end of the book, obviously my grandmother has a very big kind of role in my life. So at the end of the book, I tell this story in the epilogue that kind of brings it all together. And it's about Chris Bojalian. He's a famous author, an Armenian author. Armenians are 0.04% of the population. So we're always looking for people with the last name IAN or YAN, and then we come at you. Very exciting. We talk about food. But anyway, he was over in Armenia after one of his books published, and he was with his crew, and he was traveling around. And this man, they're about to leave. They're in this specific part of Armenia where a bunch of Armenians were kind of driven over a cliff in the Million Mile March. And so he goes, to see this location, and then he and his friends are in their tour van, and they're going to leave to go to the airport or something. And this guy runs up to them, this very kind man runs up to them and says, "Hey, I have my elderly mother-in-law. I'd really like to introduce you to her." And so they're like, okay, fine. And I think he just figured, safety, fine enough. So he goes and he meets this very elderly, like in her 90s woman. And he's talking with her. And it turns out this woman is her mother. Her father died in the genocide. Her mother and she were just about to go over that cliff that they were being driven over. And this Turkish soldier kind of grabbed her and ended up raising this lady who's now elderly, raising her as an infant, as his own child. And so then this son-in-law of hers goes and brings Chris Bourgillian there, and Chris thought it was because he wanted Chris to meet her. And it turns out he wanted her to meet Chris. Do you know that she believed she was the last Armenian on earth?
Oh,
She
wow.
thought that when she died, there was going to be no one left like her. And that's what this book is. There are more people like you and I than there are that are not. That's what this book is about.
Gosh, that's powerful. I love it. And the way that you honor the generations that have gone before to get you to the place where you sit today. How often do we reflect back and go, look at the hard yards that our forefathers went to in order to create the life that we have today. Thank you for using your story to benefit others. I just deeply inspirational, and there's an element of vulnerability there. So, I want to just highlight that too. Yeah. If I look at the workplace, what are some of the things that you see in, we're going into 2023, that women are still facing that should not be there? Like,
good question. Good question. So the pandemics, you read different research, it set us back 6 years, it set us back 10 years, it set us back. And here's where it set us back: choice. It's really important to note that the constructs of business have really not changed since business became true industry, right? And so one example, one of the newest kind of things is what successful decisions look like. And so successful decisions are based on, or value-based decisions are based on Lawrence Kohlberg's value-based decision model. And if you went to MBA school, you probably know what this is. And it's essentially that all the best decisions are based on justice, hierarchy, and rules. And when you look at pretty much every boardroom, you know that, right? And it's also fueled the great man theory. And you kind of think about it, you go, okay, that makes sense. But then you go, wait a minute. My definition and what we've seen, certainly in the US since Black Lives Matter, but, there's been such all over the world, right? This polarization. Yeah. What we realize is we don't all have the same definition of justice. We certainly don't all agree with hierarchy if we don't trust the person at the top. And the rules only work for the people who created them, right? So we know that.
Yeah, wow.
And, right? And so here's the thing about Kohlberg's research, which was done in the 1950s. He had, in this person, I'm going to tell you about, it's the person I learned about that first day in the feminist leadership theory class, where, that just literally was pivotal and changed everything for me. Her name is Dr. Carol Gilligan. She is the founder of feminist leadership theory. And she's still alive, and she'd be the one person in the world where I'd be like, I have all your albums, it just would be so tongue-tied. So she was a PhD candidate at Harvard, and so she was one of the research assistants working on Kohlberg's work. One of the first things she did for her postdoctoral research was to conduct the same exact research. Why? Because 100% of the research participants were middle-aged, wealthy white men. So she went, right? So she went and shocking, she went and did the study, but she did it with women. And what she found was that women are relational in their decision-making. And she has since said, wait a minute, it's not just women, it's people with female leadership traits. So what does that mean? That means that women will think about, if I make this investment in an acquisition, if I divest here, if I choose this over that, how is it going to impact the people or the cohorts that have the biggest stake in this decision? Of course, it's stakeholders, but it's employees, it's customers. So it takes women longer to come to a decision, but that's actually not true, right? The value-based version from Kohlberg is very A to B. But it's the reason that women aren't in the boardroom. because we consider it, but it's also the reason we win in the boardroom. You make better acquisition decisions, right? All better business decisions overall. It's why they financially outperform. So that's still a problem. The way we make decisions is just purely not seen as how successful decisions are made, because that's the status quo. The kind of day-to-day things going back to the pandemic is that it brought back this thing that never really left and has always been here, and that's the choice. Do I choose my personal well-being or my job or my family? Do I choose my family and taking care of my home or my job?
Yeah.
We still live in a very great, like, structured work-life balance, work-life integration, which is a bunch of BS, because those are very much like trade-off. It has very strive for perfection, but it also puts things at odds with each other. What you do at work might deplete what you do at home, and vice versa, versus harmony, where one fuels the other, which
absolutely
very much, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of the challenges, is the constructs of, I don't care if you work 9 to 5, what is your job? Here is your area, unless you like work in a store or you're a nurse, right? Those are different. But we still have this very kind of black and white model around who gets to be successful. What does that look like? When do you have to work? What does that all mean? We still work 3 shifts, whereas men maybe work 1, right? So we're getting up, we're getting the house ready, we go to work, we come home, and we have to constantly better ourselves. So we're constantly learning. We simply don't have enough time. So those are just some of the things that are still challenges. And then just not having career pathways, going back to the definition of success. A lot of people don't want to be CEO or chairperson. They just don't. What they want to do is make a different mark on the world. So other people having a different version of success and career pathing toward that, it might not fit who I am, which is why we always kind of, feel there's a challenge. And then there's the soft stuff around, although decision making is considered soft, the stuff that we all know, right? And from my book, if a woman doesn't take a job, you expect her to take the class, right? Whereas women are hired for experience, men are hired for potential. And so those things, we're conditioned to believe that, which is why the woman doesn't get the promotion or the job.
It's such a poor mindset, isn't it?
Oh, it is.
That is still going on. Was it 4% that I read of CEOs are female?
Yes.
And forgive me for forgetting the other percent. Was it 12% for
board members? Yeah.
Globally.
Yes. And let's go down that path. So then you have the disruptors, the people who are disrupting, like internally, right? So those folks that are in those decision seats. And then you have the disruptors who are startup founders who are saying, hey, I got this great idea. It's going to impact a ton of people. It's going to cost them less money, take less time, and actually achieve the stuff they want to achieve, right? Through disruption. The challenge is women only get 2% of all venture capital funding, the thing that allows you to invest in scale. Women of color get 0.04%.
Can I interrupt you? Because I just need to draw out this point. Gosh, this is so good. But how do we change that?
Yes.
How do we
do it?
What can we practically do as women, right, to showcase who we actually are and bring that equality back into, or not even bring in equality into the world? I just want to give you a very small insight into a conversation I had this week. He was a male, middle-class white man, and he said, and I just love it because my 17-year-old daughter was in the room with me. He said, oh no, women take up enough space in the workplace, in terms of leadership gigs. I'm like, pardon? I'm like, and I literally pretended that I just pulled the pin out of a grenade. I'm like, let's go. There's still that mentality. How do we change it?
Yeah, how do we change it? Oh my God, I just wish I was in the room.
I wish you were in the room too.
In the recliner and just watch you go.
Your name was brought up.
Yes. I'm sure. So it's a great question. And let's go to the fact of, so what we just talked about is the lack of power women hold, right? So here's the thing. Women are responsible for 90% of all consumer buy decisions, which basically means we make money go around the world. In the United States and in most of the more developed economies, including where you are, women are responsible for at least 51% of the wealth. Pretty interesting, right? And women, when it comes to kind of VCs and that kind of thing, women have a 35% ROI rate versus men who you invest in and you lose money, and maybe if you're lucky, you break even in 11%. So all of this to say, we have power, we're not in power. So how do we use that power? And some of the things that we're seeing are some of these high net worth women coming together, because women are not the VC partners. So they're not the ones who really decide on, what you choose and what you don't. And when they are in those positions, they become that woman, right? That woman who's only going to invest in women. It's like, give me a break. You only invest in men, go shut your pie hole and go talk to someone else. So the thing is, women are powerful when we come together. And that's what I love about women. Look at us, right? We are always going to lift each other up. That's just how it's going to be.
Yeah.
And so, something happened with my screen. So, and that's all right. I'll just look at you little. So coming together, so seeing these high net worth women, especially in the more kind of tech intensive, life sciences intensive industries, and creating funds that in order to invest in like seed and in, kind of first stage, that's super important. And what I love about that is it's the head nod to, hey, you don't want me in the room. You didn't invite me to your table. So I'm going to go build my own room and I'm going to go craft my own table. Yeah. So that's kind of one way to do it. Another way is finding the men who have daughters. So one of the first things that I did, and Harvard had a study a few years later, and I was like cracking up like, well, I could have saved them a bunch of money. So one of the first things I did after my defense and I received my doctorate was I hosted this panel at a very large tech conference. And the panel, the tech conference was part of I don't know, maybe 10 million person community of B2B tech developers, and only 8% of them were women. And so I hosted this panel, and there was like a who's who, men and women on the stage talking about this topic. And how do we get more female developers? And within the first 15 minutes, half the room was gone. By the end, it was like the wait staff who felt sorry for me. And so what I found out from this was that I was blaming and shaming. So I was putting blame, and men don't like to be blamed for stuff, right? White men don't like to be blamed for stuff about women. So that's a challenge. So I started kind of getting death threats, hate blogs written about me, all this stuff. And I was so like, holy crap, because I just came from being told my dissertation was the best thing since sliced bread. I mean, I just thought I loved my oral defense. I tell people, I practically ran across the stage and did like a knee slide, because I was so like, yeah. So it was really, really cool. And I loved it. So then I go on there, and I'm told that's what they felt. And I licked my wounds, and a few days later, because I was like, this is stupid, death threats for like wanting more female developers. I started reaching out to some of them. I'm pretty confrontational. So I start reaching out and just going, hey, read what you wrote, saw you in the seat, and then you left, what's going on? And what I found was that the men who had daughters were like, oh, so that person's son will have opportunities that my daughter won't. So that's the first thing, is you find the guys in charge, the guys with influence, the guys with money and power. And if they have daughters, you get them at your table. You invite them to your table. You welcome them to your table, and you teach them not how to be an ally, but how to be an enemy of the status quo.
Oh, I love that.
Right? Quo. Yes, because you know who white guys listen to, or men in charge listen to? They listen to each other. Like I'll probably listen to a woman right before, because we have more of a commonality. But it's coming together, using your collective power, creating your own rooms, investing in those women like the disruptors who nobody else is investing in, despite the fact that they've been serial entrepreneurs, they've had successful exits, they have the proof in their business case, and you fund them. You get the men who are willing to stand up and say, hey, all the data I just spouted with you, you know what, I can say that until my face turns blue. But when a man, and nobody's going to do anything, when a man does, they're like, oh, wait a minute, I'm going to get a better return. Oh, okay. So it's really getting those folks into the room who can influence others. And again, it's getting our collective power together and actually using it. And
love it. The power of a network. Yeah. That like, there's just so much gold in that. And I honestly, and just for those who are, you know, watching and listening, and I just want to go back to your website, you've got resources sitting inside of there too for women to go back and to read. Can I just ask you in closing, and this is where I guess the mama Dr. Patti comes out. If there was a younger woman listening to this, right? Think of her in her 20s, early 30s, who is just wanting to step out, who is just wanting to suck in that courage and take the next step of bravery inside her career. What wisdom would you impart on her?
Oh, I love this question. So I don't know about you, but when I was that age, I had very bad imposter syndrome. And the truth is, up until a few years ago, it snuck up on me a lot because I'm someone who has never taken a job until I got older. Never really took a job I was qualified for, right? So it was like, oh. So what would I say to her? I would say, you are enough. Start from where you are. Don't listen to the BS about fake it till you make it. You're perfect the way you are. All you don't have is the exposure that someone older than you or potentially more connected than you has. So we're going to help you go get it. And we're going to do that by acting as if. What are the things you have to believe about yourself in order to live that version of you believe what your life is supposed to look like, and go do it? It's going to come to you. The next thing is take yourself out of the equation. When you don't know something, use the scientific method. List all the things you think you need to learn. Go find them out. Remember that it's not about confidence. You can't have confidence in something you've never done before, but you have confidence. You know people, you know how to use the internet, you are resourceful, you are enough. That's what I would say.
Oh, you are gold. Okay, if there's anybody else that needs a Kleenex right now, grab it. Thank you. Like, thank you, because I just think there are many times that lie would be one of the catalysts for us living in fear and preventing us from stepping out. So thank you so much for your time. Honestly, I just am so grateful. And as I said, Disruptors is the title of your book. We'll put all your websites, you know, inside our resources where people can connect with you. Dr. Patti Fletcher, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. I've loved the conversation. Thank you for the work you're doing.